Hi there, it's Tiffany, and I'm here to talk to you today about the 6 root causes of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So, if you have Hashimoto's, you have an autoimmune condition, and there's a lot of people that actually have a thyroid condition and know that they don't feel well and have this, classic signs and symptoms of a thyroid condition, but they've never been diagnosed with it or even tested for it. And a lot of times when I have seen people, they come into me and they're showing me their blood tests from several years, over several years, and they've had antibodies tested, have not even been told, and have actually had elevated thyroid antibodies, which does indicate a thyroid autoimmune condition. And they've never been told, because the mainstream view on this is that it's no different than hypothyroidism. So they just put them on medication and that's it. But what we know is that there are a lot of things that can impact the onset or a flare up of Hashimoto's. So maybe these will resonate with you. I'm just going to go through a few of them. Like I said, there's 6 of them, kind of the main root causes that I kind of see and work with people and help people overcome and to improve their symptoms this way. So the first one being, I'm a nutritionist and work with foods. Gluten sensitivity is something I see very regularly. So obviously there's celiac disease, which, by the way, is another autoimmune condition where someone cannot do gluten at all. They cannot take in gluten. They don't have the ability to break it down, and it actually impacts and ruins their gut. So if you have gluten sensitivity, you might have a lot of similar symptoms, but it doesn't have that autoimmune component to it. However, I see a lot of the same symptoms overlap with that. So what I would say is that if you think you have a gluten issue, whether it is celiac or not, and you would know by some of your symptoms or just trialing it, you would understand how you feel when you're not eating it. And then if you test it again and symptoms flare up, that's absolutely what I would do to help kind of see what is causing that inflammation in the body. So autoimmune conditions are an inflammatory condition. So if you're eating something that is causing inflammation in your body, it's no surprise that that could cause it to flare, or it could cause it to, cause some internal inflammation that's going on long term. So you might have an autoimmune system or an autoimmune condition that you may be feeling really good for a while, and then you decide to start eating gluten again, or maybe you're eating more gluten than normal. A lot of times your symptoms will become a lot worse. And I see this in people with an autoimmune condition, and I believe that is true for myself as well. So gluten sensitivity, that is something that I think is worth trying. And usually in people, when they're coming to me with their symptoms and working nutritionally with me, and I take them through my process, usually we look into foods like that and, test them out and see how symptoms can improve while you're going through the process, and really pay attention to the symptoms. So I encourage you to do that if you feel that you have some, inflammation happening from foods. That's a good place to start. All right, the next thing, people don't maybe think about this too often, but EBV, which is Epstein-Barr virus, causes mono. You guys know what mono is. Probably had it a lot in childhood. That's something that happens. Not you haven't had it a lot. You've had it probably one time, if you've had it at all. And as a child, it can cause you to be down and out, to be extremely fatigued. And you're usually at home from school for a couple of weeks at a time, is what I remember from people when I was in like 2nd grade, and people would be home with mono. They were home for a long, long time. And then as an adult, and hearing all the people who struggle with chronic conditions and autoimmune conditions, EBV is something that is at play. It can lie dormant in your system, but there can be kind of a low level recurring infection of EBV when you become an adult. And again, a lot of this stuff can be triggered by different kinds of stressors, whether it be the food you're eating or other illness or anything like that. So there's ways you can get tested for that. And there are people that really specialize in understanding the effects of EBV. It's kind of estimated that 80% of adults actually are carrying this virus around lying dormant and may or may not raise its ugly head here and there to cause other problems. And so it can open up a whole can of worms. You can see if you have antibodies to EBV and if you have some infection that's going on right now. So it's different types of testing. It's called IgG, there's IgM. So that determines what kind of infection you have, whether it was from a past infection or if it's current. And then you would get treatment accordingly with different types of antivirals. And there's lots of supplemental things you can do as well. But it is something to look into, being that potentially 80% of us are walking around with a low-grade EBV infection just kind of lying there in wait. It is also a part of the herpes virus, which is also a part of chickenpox. It is also a part of shingles, and then cold sores and those types of things, genital herpes. It's all in that same family. And so you may be familiar with how if you are exposed and have chickenpox when you were a child, if you more than likely you don't get chickenpox again in your lifetime, you might end up with shingles down the road. And that, again, a lot of times is triggered by stress and some of the other things we're talking about with regard to Hashimoto's disease. So if you think about that and think about your history, and if you have a lot of stress going on in your life, that might be the precursor to a diagnosis of autoimmune thyroiditis, which is called Hashimoto's, or maybe it's causing a flare. So I've said stress a few times, and so I can't talk about something with regard to thyroid conditions and not talk about stress. So stress is interesting because we all understand and we know what stress is, but I believe that our modern day societies, we're so used to feeling stressed out that we just are kind of expectant, and we just kind of go on our days thinking that this is my normal and this is how it's supposed to be. It's not that bad. I'm actually used to it. And people kind of get, I don't know, they just think that this is how it's supposed to be, when we don't understand. If you have a thyroid condition, or if you have this chronic low-grade stress that to you've now become accustomed to, our bodies don't really care whether we mentally think that this is normal and fine. So we have all kinds of stress, whether it be emotional stress, physical stress, social stress, maybe how we deal with different things that come at us. You all know those people who have stress coming to them, a stressful situation, and they maybe are so calm about it and so kind of low key about it. And if that same thing would have happened to you, you would have, lost your mind in whatever way that is for you. We all respond to things a lot differently. So we have to understand, though, that affects us physiologically. So some examples, like social stress might be, being afraid to get up in front of people. That's a stressful kind of acute situation. If you have to give a speech or a presentation, it can be really stressful. Excuse me, it can feel like high stakes. So it can cause some stress and issues with that. Sometimes getting on these Facebook Lives is stressful because I don't know if I'm going to get the message out properly, if I'm going to say all the things I want to say, if it's going to resonate with people. It can be stressful, but it's not something that lives with me constantly. It could also be stress for driving in traffic. If you go through traffic and it's stressful because you're running late, or you're going to be later than you thought you were, or someone pulls out in front of you and you almost hit them, that is really stressful. That's kind of acute stress too. But if that's kind of your daily, everyday thing, day in, day out, that wears on a person. Some of the biggest things that cause major stress in people that can really linger on and on would be a divorce or a death in the family, of course, would be stressful. Moving is stressful, even if you're moving for a really good reason. If you look up at the top stressors, just Google search top stressors, it's sort of the common things that we do. People go through many times in their lifetime, and we kind of think, oh, we're moving, we're excited, we're getting a new job, and whatever it is, but all of that causes a lot of stress. And then, sort of that emotional stress, like I was talking a little bit about before, how we deal with different situations and putting boundaries up for ourselves, and how people interact with us or treat us, and how we engage with people, that all can add stress to our systems. And if you look back, talking to people who all of a sudden were diagnosed with some kind of condition, oftentimes an autoimmune condition, if you look back over the last year to 2 years, they've had a kind of an insurmountable amount of stress, or just a ton of stress for a long time that's been different than their normal stress. I've seen that numerous times. It might be some project at work. It might be some family stuff and trauma that, you know, is a lingering illness in a family, caretaking. That all adds up and weighs on your body, and your body does not like it and will eventually show up with some kind of condition. So it's all related. All right, so I've talked about gluten sensitivity. I've talked about Epstein-Barr virus. I've talked about stress. Let's go to the gut. So there's like 3 different gut things here that I want to talk about. So those are the other 3 things that can really flare up or exacerbate Hashimoto's type symptoms. So that would be the gluten sensitivity I already talked about. And then there's H. pylori, which stands for, it's Helicobacter pylori. It is a bacterial infection that can cause gastric ulcers. And if you've had ulcers, you know how painful that can be. And that, of course, affects your levels of acid in your stomach. It doesn't allow you to absorb foods and nutrients very well. And it can just cause a lot of pain on top of it. So that alone can trigger some symptoms of Hashimoto's and to trigger the actual autoimmunity. And let's just go back to that a second. So when you have Hashimoto's, or that autoimmune thyroid condition, the body antibodies in your own body will be formed to attack your thyroid gland. And eventually it will basically shut down and kill or make the thyroid gland non-functional. And so it's as if you don't have one. That's kind of the end result of it, is that you either radioactively ablate the thyroid so it doesn't function anymore and can't, you know, compete with you, or can't keep having, or doesn't allow the thyroid antibodies to keep flaring up and causing your symptoms. And then or you can have it removed. Sometimes people have it removed as if they've had cancer, which was my situation. I had it removed, not necessarily because of autoimmune. I don't know. They didn't test for that prior to, so I don't know that for sure, but I had that removed so that the cancer was obviously removed to keep it from growing. And so the effect is the same for people with Hashimoto's versus just having it removed. So that is a problem with H. pylori. It's something that is, you probably would be going to a general practitioner if you're having symptoms, and then they can test for that. And there's different tests too. So some are better than others. And then if you do have H. pylori, you can get treatment for it with, of course, there's supplements that can help with it, but a lot of times people need to, end up by needing to be on some kind of antibiotic to get rid of it. It is a bacterial infection versus a viral infection. So that can trigger Hashimoto's. And then there's something called SIBO. So that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But also there's something called SIFO, so small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So a lot of times the symptoms are really confusing, just poor gut health, lots of bloating, can go between constipation, diarrhea, feeling a lot of malaise, a lot of fatigue, a lot of inflammation. It just goes on, and it can be really, really hard to treat. So if you're going to a general practitioner, they're probably not going to dig too deep into the treatment of that and the diagnosis of it. You mostly need to go to a gastroenterologist and get a treatment for it. It might involve a colonoscopy. It might involve an endoscopy. I've heard people kind of having to do both because of their symptoms. And what usually happens is there's usually medications that are, warranted for it. And I've worked with people a lot on, a big supplement regimen, and of course, different foods that are really helpful, but that can trigger an autoimmune thyroid condition. So there's a theme here with gut health. There's a huge connection between gut health and thyroid patients. And so keeping a really good, healthy gut in all the ways that means, and it's too big to talk about it here, is something we definitely need to make sure that is in check when we're resolving some symptoms that are caused by this condition. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about, number 6, would be deficiencies in specific nutrients. So I've talked about many, many times that thyroid needs specific nutrients to help it function. Not to mention we need nutrients for our whole entire bodies, but The thyroid affects every cell in the body, and we need to have ample amounts of selenium and zinc, magnesium, iodine. We need to have good iron, levels of iron and ferritin. So ferritin is the storage iron. We need to have good levels of that in the cells so that our body and our thyroids can function efficiently. But if you are deficient in a lot of these things, we have antibodies that are formed because of the inflammation going on in our body and can exacerbate those symptoms. One kind of obscure nutrient that I see with elevated antibodies is something called asparagine. And you guess that it comes from asparagus and among other foods, but that is something I see commonly when people's thyroid antibodies have flared up and their deficiencies in asparagine are there. So that's just something I've noticed a pattern on with working with people over time now. But selenium and zinc are super helpful for the conversion of T4 to T3, and iodine is necessary to make the thyroid hormone. And magnesium is important for about 350 reactions in the body and helpful for thyroid function. And vitamin A as well. So I've talked about that before, but we need vitamin A to help with that thyroid production, thyroid hormone production, and then the conversion of it. So it's really important to be in the know. But if you have a thyroid diagnosis of Hashimoto's, or if you have kind of a misdiagnosis or you're underdiagnosed and you are certain you have some kind of thyroid condition, but it's just never been confirmed, think about these things in your history. Do you have tons of stress ongoing? Have you ever had mono? Have you had one of those infections? And, could it be lingering underneath? Do you have H. pylori? What's your nutrient status like? And if you don't know, reach out to me. I could help you with that. And then, if you have really poor gut health and it might be caused by bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth, that can be addressed too. It just takes time. So those are some of the reasons Hashimoto's can flare up or actually start occurring. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, but if this sounds like you, there is help and you can get better and resolve those symptoms. You just have to find the right place to do it. So if you are interested in any kind of help with that or have any questions, you can go ahead and comment in the comments below or reach out to me at hello@tiffanyflayton.com. So it's hello@tiffanyflayton.com. You can reach out to me there and I can try steer you in the right direction. All right, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.